change. You can all...
Yes, perfect. Uh-oh.
And you will be moderating.
Yes, unfortunate for everybody, I'll be
moderating
moderating.
over here?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to hide in the corner.
Can I use the iPad?
Yes, of course.
Just got out-hided.
I just changed.
You want to come sit next to me, John?
Yes, I would love to sit
All right, perfect. It's very lonely.
There's no questions yet, so you have to do on your own for the starter.
All right, so...
Good luck to you.
A lot of... Yeah, thank you. All right. So we have quite a variety of backgrounds represented here on stage from folks that we've heard throughout the day, and also the workshops that John ran. One of the things we want to talk about is sort of the ethics and discussion of attribution in the community, as well as some of these security issues that we find. So one of the first questions that I want to pose to the entirety of the panel while questions are coming in, so again, please ask your questions about anything really. It's nice to have a general chat, but we're focusing on the discussion of attribution, the security threats we face, what are we going to see next, that kind of evolution. I would ask, when we look at the attribution that's done in the community today, is it this mythical thing of we can't get to attribution of security threats? Or is the attribution that we're seeing just hype? Or are we seeing truly good attribution being done by some of these companies, good attribution being done by some security researchers, and then I'll have some follow-up questions for that. So Kim, you have a lot of great sort of focus in this area. I'll start with you. The research you did in Stuxnet was fantastic. What's your view on that attribution aspect?
That attribution is solid. I'll just say that. So with regard to the larger issue of attribution, I kind of was pretty vocal about the Sony hack and my skepticism on North Korea attribution. Actually, Rob wrote a great piece for us for Wired after that, talking about the appropriateness of the United States coming out and attributing that to North Korea. And I thought he made a really good point, and that was, if you're going to do attribution, you have to do whole hog attribution. You can't do it sort of halfway, which is what the U.S. did. It tried to, or it attributed to North Korea without providing the evidence. And so Rob's point was, you either provide the evidence of the attribution and it's solid evidence, or you basically just don't publicly attribute. So what happens there is that it turns into a political game. And the point of that was to apply sanctions to North Korea, and the Sony hack was the opportunistic method for doing that. So I think that there's a problem with now attribution being used for political purposes, and we're going to see more and more of that. Now the attribution is going to Russia. It used to be all the time to China, and now we're seeing Bloomberg is a huge problem in this regard. Pretty much every hack that comes out now, Bloomberg accuses Russia of being behind, or Bloomberg's anonymous sources accuse Russia. So we're getting into this realm now where we have a problem because I don't think that attribution is as big a problem as it used to be. And that's primarily because now we know what the NSA capabilities are. We know that the NSA is out there, and they have sensors on all of these systems. It is possible, if you are an intelligence agency with that level of resources, that you can get attribution right. So I wouldn't say that attribution is always going to be wrong, but I think we're getting into dangerous territory now where it's become politicized.
Yeah, fantastic. Éireann, so what do you, again, talking about that attribution discussion, what do you see the value of it to the ICS security community? And so I'll phrase the question a little bit differently, because I don't want to get in the place where we're all just agreeing with each other. Like, I can imagine most of us agree with a lot of what Kim just said. As an example, to pivot off of that, though, Havex and Black Energy were both attributed to Russia at some point. What's the value of that, or is there value in saying nation state X did this attack?
To an ICS company?
To an ICS company.
Zero, in my opinion. Like, if you have an infection or a problem, and it came from your vendor, it's still not particularly relevant which vendor it came from or what country it came from. I think some of the attribution discussion that's been going on in the community has had the wrong focus, right? And so I'll start with Kim's point that it's become politicized. And we don't want to live in a world where where the attribution is just what the government says it is. We want to see some detail around that, and we want to see some study. And I think the focus has been on attributing to a country, and that's what I think is wrong. So you want to try and attribute to a team, to families of malware, to campaign actors, and have a sense of their behaviors, and that they are working with the same tools, and not assume that they are working for a specific country. Because they may actually be working on the black market, and today they work for Iran, and tomorrow they work for China, or the US, right? So it'll be very difficult in the future to just assign it to a nation state, and it would be much better if you focused on attributing it to other types of malware and binaries that you're seeing today. And the other reason I think I worry about that is because it's not just politicized, it's also capitalized. So a lot of companies out there get their name in the press by saying it was Iran.
Yeah. So do you have anything different to contribute on that? And if not, I can ask you a follow-up question. So I'll let you sort of choose your storybook path here.
Can I choose my question?
Yes. All right. So choose me your question that you'd like.
No, I'd just like to comment, since Éireann sort of stole my point, that yes, I agree that the attribution to nation, that's not really that interesting for a defender, but it's also often pretty questionable whether you actually are making the right claims. But getting to it's both more useful and easier to attribute it to a certain group. You can pretty often tell by sort of the smell of the intrusion. Okay, it's these guys. We know what they usually do.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and answer, then I'll pick it over to you, John. The benefit of being the guy that's moderating. When I look at it, I completely agree with our three previous folks here. When I think of attribution to nation states, there will generally be executives that might care. They want to make business-level decisions about where they do business off the type of threat landscape that they see: China, North Korea, Iran, US, et cetera. We saw a huge exchange in even I'm going to say the word, the cloud market based off of NSA leaks about where we were comfortable storing our data. So some folks do care about that threat landscape, but I would agree I care far more when I'm on an environment about grouping intrusions together in a campaign. It doesn't matter if it's China, Russia, North Korea. I just care that it's actor X, that I can say a group, that I can watch tactics, techniques, procedures, tool sets change over the different patterns so I can identify those intrusions. But realistically, a lot of folks get in the habit of biasing themselves when they think of attribution. Well, it's China, so it must be intellectual property theft. It's Iran, so it must be destructive. It's Russia, so it must be NATO-focused. And that bias sort of influences us as defenders to not look at the picture in a whole and complete way. John, you sit in a really unique position, having made Shodan, with a lot of sort of the scanning you see and the activity you see. So I think your view, again, on attribution is very unique. What is your focus and what is your thought process on those folks that are using like the IP addresses and the scanning that they see via Shodan as attributing that attack?
Yeah, so I agree with attribution, the points have been made previously, but since I run Shodan and I have servers around the world, so when a report comes out and they say, we saw these IPs attacking, the US control systems, I check these IPs. And sometimes these IPs are actually my servers, and they've classified them as attackers. And I just, for the ICS stuff, I don't set any commands, I do anything fancy. It's just like, banner grabbing for Modbus or something. It's nothing crazy. But they flag these as attacks from China, because I have servers in China. And so to me, this attribution game, at least for like internet-wide scanning, is a complete joke. I cannot take any of that seriously. And every time it changes, like it's like a flavor of the month kind of thing. We're like, oh, now everything's coming from China a few years ago, and everything's from Russia now. It's like, okay, whatever, get over it. And especially, at least from internet scanning wide, you can rent a server from anywhere in the world, like I do, and do a scan for Modbus or something. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. Where the scan came from is completely meaningless. Completely meaningless. I was doing research into honeypots, so I set up a bunch of conpots, and I was listening for, traffic as usual. And I saw that somebody was scanning for the automated tank gauges, like I was, after the HD Moore research came out. And it came out Netherlands. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I don't know why Netherlands is getting up. Okay, fine, whatever. And then I continued doing research on for my honeypot stuff. And I came across a blog post out of China. This is Chinese university lab doing research into ICS. And it turns out that they were actually renting servers in the Netherlands. So it was them doing a scan from a server in the Netherlands. I just found that out by accident. But it's just, I see this all the time. So to me, attribution is just First of all, maybe it's a point like useful for politicians, but I don't see the value, and I think too often it is completely wrong.
Perfect. So I'm going to start taking the questions off that you have posted here. Please keep sending them in. It looks like we'll have some time to get through a couple of them. I'm actually going to address one of the troll questions, specifically because it's been an inside joke that I want to elaborate on for people that have missed out on it. The question is, do you believe smaller APTs, such as the Chattanooga APT, play a role in the threat landscape for ICS? So why that's come up multiple times a day in the questions is because there was a Bloomberg article that came out in 2014, I believe, 2013 or 2014, that identified honeypots on the internet. They had made their own honeypots with, of course, a honeypot vendor. So the honeypot vendor wanted to talk about the value of honeypots in the Bloomberg article. And they positioned out that all of these scans they were seeing were attacks. So basic scans were attacks, which really changes the level of discussion that we're having. And that if it was port 502 related, that it must be for an ICS system. And the number one attacker identified was from Chattanooga, US, Chattanooga, Tennessee. So they said, obviously, the US is doing a lot of attacking of these control systems and very hyped it up. It was sort of the quintessential report of bad reporting about attribution. Our own Stephen Hilt, who's here, was actually the Chattanooga APT. He was at a conference scanning out devices connected on the internet to show exactly what John was talking about, internet-connected ICS. So we've seen really, really bad attribution discussions, and we've seen really good attribution discussions, like Kim noted, with Stuxnet. Understanding the US and Israel being involved, or maybe not involved, depending on who my current employer is, talking about that, it can be an interesting scenario to understand that.
That was solid attribution.
No solid attribution necessarily, depending on who's watching. All right, so suppose that ICS and SCADA are insecure, right, and that we're not patched, they're not monitored, and we have these Iranian and North Korean and Russian threats. Why do we see a lack of physical attacks? Why do we see a lack of actual attacks that are doing damage? If they're so vulnerable and we have this activity that's occurring, why the lack of proof?
But do we sorry.
No, going down the line, then I'm sorry.
Do we see a lack? How do we know? I mean, so can someone tell me if this German steel mill thing really happened?
Yes,
because
it did, and
thank you.
yeah, so the German steel mill.
Give me the evidence.
Yeah, sorry, I'll usurp real quick. The German steel mill incident actually occurred. The BSI is very tight-lipped on it. A lot of the reporting that came out is just entirely awful. For a while, it was an insider threat from ISS source, and then now Bloomberg again, I hate always picking on Bloomberg, said that it was Havex, and their sources were people familiar with the situation.
And it was Russia.
And it was Russian.
Right.
Yeah, so...
Can I jump in there as well and say,
Yeah.
I don't even necessarily agree that BSI is tight-lipped. They've put out a very terse statement of the event.
There's nothing there.
They're very tight-lipped, so
But you have to understand that even getting that information out of that environment takes a lot of effort.
It was accidental. So the backstory of it was that report was not supposed to go out.
Oh.
The BSI has found, and if there's anybody from the BSI that wants to talk about it, feel free. The backstory, though, is that that attack occurred. It sounds like it was accidental. It sounds like the adversary just messed up in the environment. I don't know anything else that most of us don't already know. The only thing I do know was the interesting impact. The aspect that the BSI decided not to tell anybody, the US government, DHS, everybody made a very concerted, like, hey, tell us. And the BSI was very tight-lipped and said, no, this is all the information you're getting. Very German-like. I lived in Germany for 4 years. All this in Ordnung, very like all in order kind of way. But what was interesting is because of the trust that the community then had in BSI to say that they wouldn't share it with the US government, there was a lot of additional reporting that came out about incidents in Germany following the case. Right. So the BSI has used that as a case study of trust building in the community to learn about new incidents. Sorry, I'll quit taking over now. So
you're confirming it happened then?
Yes, it did happen. The discussions about what malware and all this other stuff, there is nobody but the people at the facility in BSI that know that, and they have not told people.
Did Russia do it, though?
I don't think so.
Okay, so
I don't care if Russia did it. I did get back to the
Putin
teams.
directly clicked enter.
Right.
All right. So
what was the question?
Why the lack of ponage? And I think that you answered, you started
so why
pretty
haven't
well.
we seen?
Damage,
We may have seen. We don't know.
We have seen some physical damage, and some of the accidents that have occurred in history may have been
Right.
some sort of attacks. But I'll try and answer the question as intended, and just to remind the audience what the question was. Why haven't we seen so many physical damage attacks? And I think the short answer is they're hard to monetize, right? If you attack a banking system or a point-of-sale system and you steal credit card data, you know how to monetize it. these kinds of attacks are the kind of attacks that only really nation states or very patient people can monetize.
Competitors.
Right, competitors. So they can short on the stock because you can't deliver coal from the coal mine or things like that. But monetizing on this is at a foreign policy level, at a corporate level. It's not a small team of hackers in a random country, right?
Correct. So do we have a lack of these attacks? But the question posed it that we do. Do we actually have a lack of these attacks, and why do we have this lack, if so?
I don't think we have a lack of attacks. I don't think that. We have a lack of people talking. We have a lack of people collaborating to solve the common overarching problems.
Yeah, absolutely. John, now that everything's been said, what do you have?
Well, so from somebody who's not originally from ICS, I think the tooling around ICS has been so bad for so long that, unless you had resources, it was really difficult to actually program and write malware for ICS. I think that situation has really changed dramatically. There are way more questions about Modbus on Stack Overflow. If you go to GitHub, you can go like a Go library for Modbus. So I would expect the number of attacks to increase since just the tooling around it has gotten much easier. Because people often, I do these interviews and people ask me, if everybody can just find these things on Shodan, how come we haven't seen mass outages and whatnot? And even obviously hard to monetize. I completely agree that's a huge factor. But why haven't we seen some lone, script kiddie who just, for the fun of it, wants to take down a control system? Why haven't we seen that? And in my opinion, it's just because it's been hard to do from a programmer's perspective. It's difficult to simulate, difficult to test. Just the coding and development environment is absolutely terrible in ICS. And it's kind of, worked for it so far, but
is that hard to do, to just take down a system? I mean, it's hard to do what Stuxnet did, but it's not so hard, I would think, to send a stop command and take down a system.
I think it's non-trivial. I don't think it's as simple. And also when people talk about ICS attacks, they assume catastrophic failure. That they want to see something blow up, like, 24 or whatever. It has to be dramatic, right? You can't have a subtle failure where like, oh, a light is blinking even though it's not supposed to. But it's like, no, it has to be dramatic, right? It has to be, or it has to be generator explodes kind of thing. And doing that, I think, is non-trivial.
Right.
So I think just, flipping a switch or something.
Well, I mean, it can happen by accident, as we've seen, and still be catastrophic. But like, as Robert was trying to say earlier, designing it with high confidence that it will cause this size of outage in this way, you have to have a lot of reconnaissance in advance to do that. And I would reiterate some of your points about people wanting things to blow up. In conversations with insurers and reinsurers, they're asking me to write scenarios for them to stress test their business. And they're like, can you make the plane blow up? Can you blow up all the diesel tanks? I run through all these conversations all the time, and it's ridiculous. It's like, just scale down your expectations. Yes, physical damage can happen, but this stuff happens much more often, right?
Perfect. So leading into that, there was a very good question that came in about communicating this. So how do you communicate the acceptable threat actor levels, right? How do you communicate the risk versus what you should be applying into maybe prevention versus incident response? And we're going to start on this side and go this way this time. Yeah, I'm sorry, John. So we're going to start you off with, how do you communicate about those threat actors that actually pose a risk? And basically, what do you do with that information? Do you sort of communicate about the prevention that should go into place, or do you communicate about the, once you find it, how you do incident response and maybe that cyber resilience aspect?
I don't know. It sounds like a very advanced question.
There's like 30 sentences in that.
Yeah, no. I mean, I really echo what you said during your presentation in that I don't think we're even at the level where you have these advanced conversations. That the basics are missing. Right? I don't know. Everybody's always talking about APTs and all these fancy things, but you did a survey of like network security monitoring. How many people have that in place? Like, not that many. A lot of people are working on it, but why are you having a conversation about these advanced threats if you're not even having the basics in place?
Yeah. So
I don't really think that's right.
It's a really good point. I mean, since you're agreeing with me, I'll take it. But what I'll say is when I have defenders that come into place and come into class, and they'll ask me, how do I protect against the NSA? How do I protect against the PLA, the FSB, the AZ-100? I usually reply back to them with, if your only threats are those nation-state teams, congratulations, you've won security. For the rest of us mere mortals, we're dealing with configure, we're dealing with misconfigured devices, we're dealing with slammer still showing up in HMI environments. So I would agree that we have to discuss about the threats. We have to be aware of the impact. I don't think it's sort of a just discard the discussion. but we have to cage our expectations about what we can respond to and detect, and we actually have to take an approach for those basics and building that discussion
There's so much
to get there.
low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And everybody wants to talk about the sexy things in security, but there's so much, like even now for web applications, there's still SQL injection going on all over the place, right? That's still like a super common vector, but nobody wants to talk about that because it's known, it's common, it's not sexy, blah, blah, blah. But that's where it really is, from my perspective, because even you look at Shodan, there's so much low-hanging fruit that almost all large organizations have. I'm like, just get the basics right first before you start going crazy.
So over to you now, specifically about communicating the threats to management and how you do that and where you sort of place your investments based off those discussions.
I think that's an issue about long-term trust. You have to maintain. I often say security, working in security, it's almost all about trust. You have to make people trust you, which is, well, you have to sort of do social engineering on your peers and your board of directors. And you can make all the fancy presentations you want, but they have to trust you. You must have shown that you can do good work first.
I think that's fantastically stated. Éireann. Now that we've discussed it, do you want a different question? Or do you have different things to
I don't
contribute?
really speak to management
So we're not
general,
going to. So now pivoting off of that, I think really important from that moral aspect. We talk about trust and establishing trust. The next question is specifically discussing the moral aspect of screaming about we are under attack to get increased funding, to get increased security resources. Is it morally acceptable or even dangerous to go down that route?
Absolutely. It
All right, we're
means, it means that we have a problem with recency bias, right? So like, why do people worry about HAVAX or Black Energy or all these other things instead of default hard-coded passwords in all of their kit? Because they heard about it in the media. And then, no disrespect, I admire the work, but...
It was Bloomberg.
It was Bloomberg, right, exactly.
The takeaway, it's China and it's Bloomberg and Russia.
I guess my point is that the media should be informing our wider discussions about security, not like the threat we're looking for today.
But that's boring.
Right? Yeah.
That's boring.
It is boring. Yeah.
So Kim, I'm going to pose the same question to you because you have done a lot of good journalistic research.
Right.
So I think a lot of us in the community have read your reports and go, oh, this is a different level than what we see a lot of times in terms of the ethics and morality behind this. So what's your view, especially as a reporter that's been in the trenches doing the research, as well as reporting out with Wired, about the morality of sort of screaming about attacks that we may not be highly confident about to increase action in the community?
So morality, I'm not sure is the word that I would want to use, because that implies sort of a different level of sort of repercussion. Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a problem, if nothing else, than that it anesthetizes people to the real threats that are out there, and it makes it hard for them to distinguish, and they become inured to it, and they just stop listening to it. So it's like the monthly hack now. We know that there's going to be a major news report every month at the very least on a new hack. And each one has to top the previous one or it doesn't get attention. And I'll cop to, being sort of at fault for with security researchers. Security researchers contact me all the time with new research they have, and I have to tell them what's new in this. And I'm at a disadvantage because I've been covering computer security since 1999, so there really is very little that's new to me. Whereas the Bloomberg reporters just started covering it presumably yesterday, so everything is new to them.
The flavor of this panel brings me so much joy.
So yeah, I mean, I think that I wouldn't go on and say that there's a moral obligation, but there definitely is a professional obligation to make yourself knowledgeable about what is new and what is important, and make this determination when someone comes to you to have the base of knowledge to know that's bull. We're not going to report that. Or back it up with something or whatever. So I think you do have an obligation, a professional obligation, to be truthful to the reporters and to know enough to make the distinction when something is important and when something isn't.
Well stated.
I think a lot of work, too, went into the attribution. And like a lot of reporting today is hack of the week, as you said.
Yeah.
And so not for reporters, but for us in general, don't be reactionaries, right? Like think long-term, systemic, how do I improve my program instead of hack of the week.
Right.
And for journalists who are willing to put years into attributing things, that should be applauded over hack of the week stories.
Yeah.
Perfect. So now I'm going to start with you this time, so we sort of mix it up here. First, though, I'm supposed to ask you about the church bells. Is there like some story that we're going to go through at the church bells? All right, but if you have a certain amount of money to spend about securing your assets, assuming that the basics are already covered, where do you put that allocation of funding? Where do you put the resources into securing assets if the basics are covered?
Staff.
All right, good. Cyber stuff, yes.
Yeah, you need good people. Don't buy products. Security products suck, basically. You can't. You can't buy a black box saying this. Put this in your network. It will make you secure. It seems like a easy solution, but it simply doesn't work. You need good people, and you need to communicate with other teams. You have to stop thinking about your little sandbox. You have to cooperate with other people within your field, within your nation, and share information, and actually talk to each other and help each other out. And that's not happening enough. Certainly not in Sweden.
Perfect. Aaron?
I'll pass.
Okay. Kim? Pass. John? All right, so I'll add then that on that discussion of investments, when I look at it, I usually go back to that sliding scale discussion where I say if you've really done the architecture and then you put your whatever flashy boxes that you're going to buy or that people force on you into your passive defense, which can add some value, right? There's value in these security products sometimes, but they're not going to fix the APT. It requires people. So if you've done that architecture, then you've done the basics and doing that passive defense. That next thing to me is really about empowering the people, which is a lot of what you picked up on and stated, with information sharing in the community, discussing with your peers about how to tackle these problems, training and empowering. And I really highlight the empowering piece. When I go in, unfortunately, as a consultant sometimes, I'll get a lot of people that sort of tell me what I'm supposed to say to their executives, and if I just repeat what they stated, the executives are like, oh my gosh, that's very insightful. It's like, why didn't you just listen to your people? So a lot of us want that outside validation more than our own internal folks, and if you actually empower those security professionals in your organization, you'll generally find that they know what they're talking about. From there, we'll
Unless
start...
they work for Sony.
Do what?
Unless they worked for Sony.
And, oh, yeah, poor Sony. If you have more than a 1-to-1 ratio of management to security professionals, your breach is going to be embarrassing. All right, so the next discussion here.
I like that metric. That was a good metric.
That's my stamp of approval there for him. So going back to the media thing real quick, we have this, the poll says media is important, is basically what the question states. What could media do better? So I'm going to first start with John, then kick it down to you, Kim, who's sort of the de facto expert here. But John, what's your perspective of what media could do better about communicating ICS threats without overhyping it? If we're talking about these issues of attribution and hype, how do they do better?
The challenge of covering ICS in the media, as far as I see it, is relating it to the average life. So, for an example, I did an interview with CNBC with Melissa Lee, and it was supposed to be a documentary on ICS and infrastructure in the U.S. and all the cyber-related problems they're facing. And I did an hour-and-a-half-long interview with them. It was very focused on ICS. And then a half a year later, they came back to me and say, "Hey, John, we'd like to reshoot it because we want to get some different angles, blah blah." And then they come back out and we do another interview, and this time it's all about webcams. And I called the producer and I say, like, what the fuck happened? Like, I thought this was supposed to be ICS. Like, yeah, we did some focus yeah, I mean, it was, I did all this research on ICS and everything, and they come back to me, it's like, yeah, we did some testing and we ran it by some editors, and it turns out we just can't sell ICS. We cannot package ICS in a way where, the average person on NBC can care about this. You talk to somebody and you say, oh, power plants are insecure, whatever. They're like, oh, yeah, this is very scary. Okay, well, whatever. I don't give a fuck. It doesn't relate to them. They have kids, they have family, they have health problems, they have money to worry about. ICS and security is just not on their radar. And that's why almost every story is always, it's never about technology. It's never about the issue. It's always about the people.
That's a bad reporter.
No, they're all like that. I'm sorry. Every single
I just want to say ICS is about people. The problem is framing it as ICS.
Yes, I know, but
if you're framing it as trains jumping rails, if you're framing it as power grids going down and generators stopping and people dying in hospitals, then, but it can't be framed as ICS. I would agree with that.
Yeah, that's why I've seen way more coverage now with IoT. Because IoT is everywhere, and people can relate to it a bit easier, because you're like, oh, you can control your lighting, whatever, home automation over the phone,
It's easier to spell as well.
And then it's like, that's why ICS is lumped in with IoT now, whether you like it or not. But honestly, it makes the conversation infinitely easier, because it's also sexy, they can cover latest IoT, blah, 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 and then at the end, they have like a paragraph on security, right? It's sort of lumped in, and it's easier to do that. I remember when I first, launched Shodan, I had these reporters contact me like, oh, we love Shodan, it's cool technology, but I have no idea how I'm going to create a story out of this. Because it's just too technical. People will not care about the technology. They'll care if you can put in a context where it relates to their lives. And so I think, just...
We'll drink about it later.
Yeah.
Okay? All right. So one thing that I'll kick off from that to transition to Kim is I often find about the technical aspect that reporters that do very good research into this really take that research focus, like Kim, you have, where it's not just let me talk about something without knowing about it, right? So like if you were a German reporter, if you're reporting on German politics, it would be expected that you could probably speak German, read German, understand the political system. You would actually have some sort of pedigree to do that. A lot of what we see with cyber war reporters is they weren't making it somewhere else, and now all of a sudden cyber was sexy, so I'll just do cyber stuff, and I don't need to have the pedigree to support that. But there are some really good journalists out there. I've gotten to meet quite a few of them. And Kim, I'll kick it back over to you on that. Sort of what do you see that media could do better? These journalists coming in to our community, how can we use them to help us?
I mean, journalism can do a lot better. I think that the problem is exactly what you've identified, is that you have, most reporters don't have a security beat. There are very few of us that actually cover computer security as a beat. So you have sort of general interest reporters then getting assigned to a security story, and they don't have the background, so they're coming to it very vague. But you guys can really help reporters like that by knowing how to talk to them. I mean, when engineers talk to reporters and all they can talk about is technical stuff and the way that they would talk to someone else at a conference like this, you've already lost the reporter there. And so I think that it's incumbent upon the community to figure out how to explain things. Bruce Schneier is, for all of his faults, and I know that a lot of people criticize him, one thing that he's really, really good at is synthesizing really complicated topics down to a few words, a sentence, an analogy that everyone can identify with quickly. And that's something that the community has to become much better at. You have to understand who your audience that you're talking to. I'm not talking about dumbing it down, because you don't have to dumb it down. You just have to find the right language and the right appropriate metaphors that make it salient to them.
Perfect. So with that, we're running out of time. I want to give like a 30-second last pitch to you. As
What?
You've been quiet.
We were supposed to argue. We
Aaron,
needed an
hold
argument.
on, no arguing. Little Bobby would not be impressed with arguing, all right? So we got to be nice. When we look at the aspect of the monetization comment that came up, so we can pivot off this real quick and end out the panel on time or a little bit over. Do you see it happening that a company would actually sort of damage a competitor or monetize that aspect? There's a huge risk of getting caught in that case. Do you see it where an ICS vendor or a competitor would actually do damage to an actual competitor, thinking that there's a monetary value out of that? Corporate espionage, basically. All on you.
Me?
Yes, you.
I thought we were talking to him.
No. Last one to you
sorry.
here.
Oh, yeah. There will always be stupid people that think they can get away with it. And yes, the risk certainly is there. Not the big vendors, but there will be smaller, less morally advanced vendors that could do something like that. Yes.
Perfect. So with that, I want to end it out apparently on There Will Be Stupid People, to note that a lot of the ethics around the things that we see, they are things that we need to take seriously, attribution in the community as well, security threats as we evolve, but we always need to keep mindful of what the threats are that we're facing, what engineers, operators, asset owners, stakeholders care about, and making that business case for security to ultimately raise the bar on what we have as the community. So with that, I'll turn it back over. Thank you so much for joining us up here for the panel and sitting through it.
Thank you very much. That was
All right, thank
that was
you.
fun.